Welcome to the Whalen Library. I'm Courtney. We are excited to have Evan Hadingham back again to talk to us about human origins. He's a science journalist, author, and documentary producer. For over 3 decades, he was the senior science editor at Nova at WGBH. He was involved in all editorial aspects of the production programs from rough cut to picture lock, and developed and evaluated new program ideas. He has several nonfiction books on archaeology, prehistory, and technology, including one we'll see tonight, Discovering Us. And his science articles have appeared in Smithsonian, Discover, The Atlantic, National Geographic, and Aviation History. So welcome, Evan. I'll get out of the way after I just let you know we are recording. You'll be able to rewatch and share on YouTube. And if you're joining us on Zoom, put your questions in the chat and I will raise my hand and read them aloud when we get to that section. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Gordon. So welcome, everybody, to the world of our ancient human ancestors. It's a world filled with a dizzying variety of species that all trace back to a common ancestor that we shared with today's chimpanzees around 6 million years ago. Tonight, you're going to encounter a few of your long-lost prehistoric relatives, partly with the help of renowned artist and anatomist John Gurchie, whose beautiful and meticulously accurate facial reconstructions you see here. You're also going to encounter some rather less impressive plastic skulls made in China that came into my hands in a most unusual manner. I retired from GBH a couple of years ago, and my colleagues threw a retirement party for me in the garden of a colleague at living in Newton, and it was set up as a surprise scavenger hunt. So my bosses at Nova went out and bought these 6 replica skulls, and they were buried at different parts in the garden with intricate rhyming clues that were given to all the guests, and they were told to scatter and go find them. Now, I was not part of the search party. Instead, they were brought back to a table that was set out in front of me. And there were 6 spots there, and it was my job to identify the species and arrange them in chronological order. The only problem with this, here I am, was that I had a couple of cans of Pilsner by this time. It was about 80 degrees, and I was laughing so hard, I didn't do a very good job. But I'm hoping that I'll do a slightly better job tonight, and that you won't leave in total confusion about all these many ancestors. Now, I'm going to hand out these skulls, and you'll notice several curious features of our plastic replicas. The teeth are coated with hideous green slime, suggestive of either rotten dental hygiene or the possibility that an obsession with eating spinach massively predates Popeye. Even curiouser, the top of one skull, which I will show you, exhibits a bright red gash, as if it were actively bleeding. Surely strong evidence pointing to foul play in the demise of this particular ancestor, worthy of bringing to, say, Monsieur Poirot's attention. But first, a few words about what I can and can't do tonight. What I can't possibly do is give you a complete picture of human origins. Instead, I propose to zoom in on 4 leading characters in the human story, each represented by its distinctive skull. I'll touch a little on the evidence for how they might have looked if you'd met them, what their lives may have been like, and what happened to them. Despite their shortcomings, I hope these plastic relatives of ours will help focus your attention and raise questions about the fast-changing science of where we all came from. So, in the words of Monsieur Poirot, let us imagine these truly cold cases, one by one, to unveil the secrets of our ancient ancestors.
20,000.
That's the end of the amateur theatricals for tonight. So, now, first skull. For a skull, this is the one ancient ancestor most people know about. This is the famous Lucy, discovered just over 50 years ago in Ethiopia. So straight off the bat, what do we notice? Any suggestions from the floor? And I'm going to hand them to you. So just generally looking at it.
Big brow. Big brow.
Ridge,
Yep, that's very good.
pointy jaw.
Yes, a snout-like. It's very projecting face. Also, these big extensions here that mean that they're for chewing muscles, right? So this thing is eating a lot of grass and seeds and probably scavenged meat. But what about something more basic? This is tiny. You know, Lucy's 3'3", and her brain is brain size is the size of an orange. That's also equivalent to that of a chimpanzee today. That's about a third the size of us. So I won't pass out the orange, but I'll send her on her rounds and start her story for you. At first glance, it looks pretty primitive. So how do we know that it's a possible candidate for a human ancestor? The answer takes us to this forbidding place, the site of Hadar in the Afar region of Ethiopia. In these remote desert badlands, temperatures can reach 113 degrees in the hottest months. In 1974, Don Johansson, a 31-year-old graduate student, was hiking back to his Jeep when he spotted, he has told this to me many times, he just happened to glance over his shoulder and he spotted a tiny arm bone protruding from a stony slope. With mounting excitement, he was able to recover about 40% of a skeleton that would eventually be dated to around 3.2 million years ago. Nicknamed Lucy after the Beatles song that was playing in the camp when he returned, the fossil skeleton turned out to be a female that was originally around 3 feet tall and weighed 70 pounds. 3 million years ago, Hadar was a tough place for Lucy to survive. The climate was more congenial than today. There were periods of high rainfall and mild temperatures alternated with cooler, drier episodes that favored open grasslands. But this landscape was full of nasty predators. Crocodiles, hyenas, and saber-toothed cats with 7-inch fangs, which would have regarded Lucy as a tasty little hors d'oeuvre. In fact, her pelvis bears a puncture mark from the tooth of just such a predator, probably resulting in her death. At night, her only relatively safe place would have been in the trees. Her long arms and hooked fingers testify to ape-like adaptations to the treetops. An overall trend toward a cooler, drier climate meant that the fruit trees on which Lucy depended would grow further apart in a more open grassland landscape. That may have favored her most significant adaptation, bipedalism. The remains of her pelvis and knee joints, see the knee there and the pelvis, clearly show that she was an upright habitual walker. And if anyone had any doubts, the case was nailed by the 1978 discovery at Laitoli in Tanzania of this dramatic trail of footprints, probably left by Lucy's species and preserved in a light full of ash from a nearby volcano. Before Lucy's discovery, it was widely assumed that what separated humanity from the apes was our big brain and special intelligence. In fact, Lucy and her orange-sized brain shows that upright walking was the most distinctive adaptation of her species. We should definitely consider her species, Australopithecus afarensis, as a success, since they survived for some 800,000 years. That's about 3 times longer than the lifetime of Homo sapiens so far. Another common assumption used to be that a single family tree of ancestors connected us today all the way back to Lucy's species. That idea was immortalized by a famous fold-out graphic from a Time Life book published in 1965, titled The March of Progress, The Road to Homo sapiens. The graphic strongly implied that humanity's evolution followed a single straight-line course, beginning with an early ape and ending with the triumph of modern humans. This image had enormous public impact and has been endlessly parodied. My favorite is the Simpsons version, where you go from Monkeys eat a lotus all the way up to Homo sapiens. But as our next fossil shows, gaps in the fossil record led scientists to drastically underestimate the diversity and complexity of our family tree, which is more like a spreading bush than a narrow tree trunk. Whoops. Our next skull represents what until recently was thought to be the earliest member of our human family, called Homo, the genus called Homo, which includes both today's humans and extinct species related to us. Our skull is a replica of the most complete Homo habilis discovered in 1973 at Lake Turkana, Kenya, dating to around 2 million years. And you'll notice, yes, this is the one with the bloody gash on the top. I can't imagine what possessed them to paint it that way, but anyway, that's beside the point. So what are the differences? Notice there's a more rounded shape to the skull and a flatter face. Lucy's ape-like protruding snout has gone. And the plastic modelers made this skull a little bit too big, however. On average, it was only a little bigger than Lucy's orange, let's say a grapefruit, her brain size, that is. The name, here, let's pass it around. The name Homo habilis, or handyman, was given to a jawbone and skull fragments found in 1960 in Tanzania's Olduvai Gorge by a team led by pioneering anthropologists Lewis and Mary Leakey, you see here, who were the first to investigate East Africa's Rift Valley for traces of our fossil ancestors. The Leakeys were influenced by Darwin's view in his final book, The Descent of Man, published in 1871. Drawing attention to the anatomical resemblance between today's humans and African great apes, Darwin argued that the roots of our family tree must lie somewhere in Africa. Amazingly far-sighted, you know. A belief that he first recorded in this famous sketch in a notebook way back in 1837. Darwin also believed that our ancestors' most significant adaptation was two-legged walking, which he thought freed up the hands to make and use stone tools, along with a distinctive, rapidly growing brain. So that's what Darwin thought. So the Leakeys went to Africa specifically looking for traces of a big-brained bipedal ancestor, and the skull fragments that they found at Olduvai Gorge seemed to fit the bill. At other sites in Olduvai, they found evidence of simple stone tools made by bashing river cobbles apart to reveal a sharp edge. This is typical of them. Until his death in 1972, Louis Leakey was firmly convinced that Homo habilis was indeed his big-brained toolmaker and our direct ancestor, a connection between Australopithecines like Lucy and all of us today. But Leakey's assumption has been hard to test, because besides that skull, Homo habilis remains are extremely elusive. It's like a gap in the record. Memorably, paleoanthropologist Bill Kimball said that all the fossils from around 2 million years ago would, quote, fit in a shoebox and leave room for a decent pair of shoes. Now, that was the case until barely 3 weeks ago, okay, when Meave and Louise Leakey made a sensational announcement. They're the daughter-in-law and granddaughter of Lewis and Mary, and they're distinguished paleoanthropologists in their own right. At Lake Turkana, their team found the first substantial skeletal remains, most of the upper body, of a young adult Homo habilis. Defying expectations of a more advanced-looking ancestor, the new find was about the same size as Lucy and had similar long chimp-like arms, well suited for life in the trees. It doesn't mark the transition to a more modern body plan that everyone expected, okay? Moreover, it now seems likely that despite its name, Homo habilis wasn't the first toolmaker. Evidence of simple tools made from river cobbles has now been traced back to Lucy's heyday, around 3.3 million years ago. Now, it really shouldn't surprise us that Australopithecines were capable of making these rudimentary artifacts. Ever since the late Jane Goodall first observed chimps using twigs to poke termites out of their nests, many examples of tool making have been observed among primates, not to mention crows, dolphins, octopuses, sea otters, ants, and many more. And my absolute favorite, which is a very recent news story, and if you remember anything from this talk, you're going to remember this. The University of Vienna just published an elaborate study of a 13-year-old Swiss brown cow named Veronica, who skillfully uses a broom, manipulated with her tongue, to scratch the most sensitive parts of her itchy anatomy, such as her udder. And what I really love is that, you know, she's such a discerning toolmaker that using her mouth, she flips it around to do the less sensitive parts of her anatomy with the other end of the brush. Apparently, she's kept like a pet, you know, not in normal conditions. So, anyway, so it just goes to show. So the story of Homo habilis illustrates how elusive the clues to our ancestors can be, and how easily new discoveries can overturn old assumptions. The transition between the Australopithecines like Lucy and early members of the Homo family remains a mystery. But just after 2 million years ago, we encounter one of the most dramatic examples of a startlingly modern-looking forebear. And from my grab bag, we have Homo erectus, thought to have been the first ancestor to leave Africa around 2 million years ago. Now, what do we see again? Again, it's a flatter face, very robust skull, and massive projecting eyebrow ridges. And interestingly, I wasn't sure what the latest scientific theories were, speculations for what purpose or just why these evolved. And it turns out the jury's completely out. There's about 4 or 5 competing explanations. The argument ranges from, you know, support for robust chewing once again, but they could also have evolved simply as a way of displaying social dominance, the way silverback gorillas today have a bony crest along the top of their head, which serves no anatomical purpose, but it's, you know, it increases their formidable appearance. Okay, so there we go. Find the green slime.
Is that one the right size?
The size of all, yeah, I mean, the size of all of this relative to one another, as I realized when I was already preparing the talk, is not that great, but it gives just gives you an overall sense, you know, which is the most influential discovery of erectus, Homo erectus, and perhaps the most complete skeleton of any ancestor ever found, was the so-called Turkana boy, discovered in 1984 near the shores of Lake Turkana. It posed a formidable 3D jigsaw puzzle of more than 150 pieces, painstakingly pieced together in a lab for over 3 years. What eventually emerged was full of surprises. At 800 cc, its brain was twice the size of Lucy's, or a chimp, but only half that of an average human today. In fact, the brains of modern infants typically reach this size by the end of their first year. But the measurement of the Turkana boy's long and lanky bones indicated that he stood about 5'4" tall. So the question is, how old was the boy when he died? Recently, scientists explored this question with a microscope, counting the rings of enamel laid down like tree rings each year in his teeth. Every year you get a new layer of enamel in your teeth. Astonishingly, they concluded that he was no more than 8 years old at the time of his death, yet had already reached most of his adult height potential by that age. So evidently, the childhood of erectus was much shorter and faster than that of today's infants. And I can't help, well, no, I'll maybe skip the joke, but can you imagine having an 8-year-old who's 5'4". One assumes that their 8-year-old acting out was also way back, further back. Anyway, that's all silly. The Turkana boy's bones also suggest that its lean and long and lean body was well suited for hot, dry environments and fully capable of long-distance walking and running. This shows a 1 million-year-old footprint, probably made by erectus at the site of Ileret in Kenya. It's kind of an amazing thought. It's 1 million years ago that footprint was made. It's likely that long-distance endurance running provided our ancestors with a crucial hunting strategy in a landscape filled with formidable predators like lions, cheetahs, and hyenas. During the 1980s, anthropologists observed the San hunters, also called the Bushmen, but the more proper term is the San hunters of Botswana's Kalahari Desert, and they chase antelope in 100-degree temperatures for several hours until their prey finally collapses from exhaustion. And this is how, humans could outrun species who are much faster gallopers or runners, and so on. But arid landscapes weren't the only places where Homo erectus thrived. Their fossils span a vast area from the African Rift Valley to China and the islands of Southeast Asia. So this was clearly a highly capable ancestor that could adapt to a wide range of environments. Besides long-distance running and hunting, fire and cooking are thought to have given them a crucial advantage. In some South African caves, burned bones and scorched sediments dating back to at least 1 million years ago represent the earliest direct evidence for the use of fire. On average, cooking meat and plants releases about 30% more energy than eating raw food. And this energy gain, was probably essential to fuel the highly active lifestyle influenced by the Turkana boys' lean and limber anatomy. And of course, campfires would have protected them from predators and provided a new focus for social life beyond the daytime hours. Now, if we jump forward about 500,000 years in Europe, we meet our most notorious and misunderstood ancestor, the Neanderthals. In popular culture, they're the origin of the clumsy, club-wielding cartoon caveman who crops up everywhere, from the Flintstones to Geico commercials, to one of my favorites, Buster Keaton's masterpiece, The Three Ages, which if you don't know it, you must immediately go and watch. And here he is in this classic image. Where's my Neanderthal then? Let's see. Now, he should be bigger. Neanderthals are very robustly built. They have a flattened cranial bowl. It's long and low, longer than you get this impression from this plastic skull. And it's just a very distinctive shape. It's less rounded than our skull, and it has a kind of a bun-like, it's called a bun, appendage on the back here. And again, you see, considerable eyebrow ridges. Their brains were the same size or even bigger than ours, somewhere up to 1700 cc. And it's as if what's really striking about their anatomy is it looks like somebody grabbed them by the nose and kind of pulled the whole face forward. You don't really see it in this model, but you will see it in a Gertrude illustration I'll be showing. Just pass this guy around. Now, those huge noses may have helped moisten and warm frigid air during some of the coldest phases of the Ice Age. Their bodies were stocky, rugged, and muscular, and show frequent signs of traumatic injuries, probably from close-range spear hunting of big games such as mammoths, bison, and rhinoceros. Neanderthals are our long-lost cousins. While Homo sapiens was still evolving in Africa, they occupied much of Europe and Central Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. Then, around 70,000 years ago, as anatomically modern humans, just like ourselves, began moving out of Africa and into Europe, they disappeared. The traditional explanation is that Homo sapiens outcompeted or even exterminated them because we were smarter, more innovative, and more socially and culturally advanced. Well, in the study of Neanderthals, they really got off to a bad start. The first publication about them in 1864 was by geologist William King, who studied a fossil skull cap and bones from a cave in the Neander Valley in Germany. That's where they got their name from. And he looked at the skull cap and emphasized its ape-like character. Despite its large brain case, King concluded that, quote, "the thoughts and desires that once dwelt within it never soared beyond those of the brute." Worse was to follow. In 1913, anatomist Marcelin Boule published a study of a nearly complete Neanderthal skeleton from a cave at La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France. This is actually a museum kind of reconstruction of the find. Now, in the reconstruction that he made from these bones, it was a grotesque image featuring a hunched over posture with curving spine and knees perpetually bent and an ape-like grasping big toe. This is indeed the origin that you see in the movies of how cavemen walked. And this is entirely owing to this one reconstruction from all those years ago. Boole concluded that Neanderthals were inferior in all respects to the modern humans who replaced them. And his verdict inspired this engraving of a scary-looking beast in London's Illustrated Weekly News. What Boole failed to realize was that the unfortunate La Chapelle Neanderthal was a chronic invalid, crippled by severe arthritis and other ailments. By the time his mistaken verdict was corrected, it was too late. In popular media, the caveman had arrived. Now, in recent years, this is not my favorite Gertrude drawing. I mean, it's a beautiful red chalk drawing, obviously in the style, meant to be deliberately in the style of Leonardo's similar sketches. But this is a very accurate rendering of what the skull looks like. And you can see an entirely different expression of humanity coming out here. It's a really wonderful drawing, I think. In recent years, new discoveries have begun to chip away at the negative image and push back against the perception of Neanderthals as incapable know-nothings. For example, Neanderthals manufactured glue from the resin in birch trees for joining spear tips and stone axes to wooden halves. This requires a complex high-temperature extraction technique. It requires them to have built something a bit more than a regular hearth. It's almost would almost been like a kiln-like structure, because they had to get up to, I think it's about 2,000 degrees centigrade in order for the birch tar to liquefy. So, you know, that's a complex technology to pass down. They buried their dead and occasionally made ornaments, such as this 130,000-year-old necklace made of eagle talons. The first simple expressions of cave art, once thought to be exclusively created by modern humans, have been attributed to Neanderthals in Spain around 65,000 years ago. And these are some of the images from that cave in Spain. And this is, you know, one of the most rudimentary expressions of, you know, of art you can get, which is blowing ochre pigment from the mouth around the impression of the hand. Okay, that's a very common image in cave art. But if this dating is correct, it would have started with Neanderthals. Now, the dating is controversial. I am skeptical about it, and there is a problem in that there are these scattered examples of Neanderthals capable of symbolic thought and expression, but they seem fairly rare. They're not routine the way they become when modern humans start entering Europe and developing, you know, leaving us with Lascaux and Altamira and these great works of cave art. So there is some cognitive or cultural difference playing out here. That's fairly obvious to me, and I think to a lot of people. But I've taken you from one extreme, and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, you know. The real shock came from a stunning breakthrough in the science of ancient DNA extracted from Neanderthal bones. In 2010, Swedish geneticist Svante Paabo published the first sequencing of the Neanderthal genome, a feat for which he would eventually receive the Nobel Prize. His results, so he was extracting genetic material from Neanderthal bones. That's what's going on here. His results showed that 99.7% of our genes are identical to those of a Neanderthal. Moreover, far from totally replacing them when our ancestors entered Europe, we interbred with them. We know this because everyone outside Africa today has a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in their genome. It varies from about 1 to 4%. In fact, we now have specific examples of ancient hybrid individuals identified in bones dug up from cave sites. We've actually found, in one case, a hybrid child, you know, Neanderthal, I forget which it is, Neanderthal father, modern daughter or something, the modern wife, modern mother. So, whatever the differences between us and the Neanderthals, they were not so great as to discourage sex. The revolution created by ancient DNA in understanding human origins is a huge topic for another lecture. But I could scarcely wind up our talk without mentioning an equally momentous finding in the same year the Neanderthal genome was published, in 2010. From this tiny pinky bone, dug up at a cave in Siberia called Denisova, we're looking at this fragment of a bone there, one of Svante Paabo's team extracted a genome unlike either the Neanderthal or the modern human sequence. In fact, it testified to the existence of a previously unknown branch of humanity, now known as the Denisovans, after the cave where the pinky bone came from. The DNA of living people carries this distinctive DNA signature across a vast region, stretching from Siberia to Tibet and from China to the islands of Southeast Asia. Like Neanderthal DNA, This means that modern humans must have interbred with Denisovans as they expanded into this region. As the modern humans expanded, there was this existing population of Denisovans covering this enormous area of Eastern Asia and all the way down into Southeast Asia. And we just didn't know they existed, okay, before 2010. So the minute it was identified through genetics, the hunt was on to try and find a fossil. You know, what did these guys look like that we didn't know? We only just had genetic data. It's kind of the reverse, it's a reverse new way of doing this whole science, you know. Fossils ruled, but now it's DNA that's, you know, really upping the ante. And here is John Gurtschy's striking reconstruction of the only skull so far identified to be definitely that of a Denisovan. And this was just last summer. This summer. So here's this newcomer to the human family. An extremely rugged individual. Okay. As you can see, again, it's worth emphasizing we would have no idea that this major offshoot of humanity existed without the data from a single Siberian pinky bone. With each new exciting DNA discovery and advances in AI, the picture of our origins gets more complicated. For example, another previously unknown ancient ghost population was recently identified in Asia, a mystery group that is yet to be associated with any fossil remains. Its existence was detected in the genes of living Asians by an AI machine learning program trained by scientists to run through mountains of genetic and demographic data. So this has completely changed the ball game of paleoanthropology when you can sit in front of your computer. Yet another thing to keep you in front of your computer, sifting through all this data from living people, which can show you things that you would never necessarily have ever found in the field. That's the point. Let's consider how far our story has come from the beginning of this talk. Far from representing a single march of progress, the inevitable triumph of a big-brained ancestor with superior technology, we now have a very different picture. While today we're the only human species on planet Earth, our solitary condition is exceptional. For much of our evolutionary past, until about 40,000 years ago, our ancestors shared their world with several different species. Instead of a single tree, imagine a tapestry or a braided stream with tributaries and interweaving rivulets, some petering out while others split off and then rejoin the main current. While we came from just one of these many streams, this image of our origin and all the new knowledge we've gained should instill us with wonder and appreciation of our role in the grand unfolding story of life on Earth. All right. Questions? Yeah.
So when we were in Australia a number of years ago, we were at Ayers Rock and we were shown some cave art under the rock. And we were told it was about 50,000 years old and evidence of the original inhabitants of Australia having been there. And art in Europe seems to have gotten a lot more sophisticated about 50,000 years ago. There's a hint that something happened to the mental capabilities of our species around that time. Any thoughts about that?
Have you got another hour to talk about it? Well, the first humans to reach Australia, that's been sort of a moving target, and originally was thought to be about 40,000, but now the dates have marched quite a bit earlier than that. And most, I mean, Aboriginal societies today have this very rich vein of cave art, and exactly when that begins is also somewhat up for grabs. But the real game changer, another recent discovery, and in the same hemisphere, is on the island of Sulawesi. They found examples of not just any old cave art, but an actual scene of hunters chasing an antelope dated to 48,000, which is well before cave art gets going. Cave art gets going in Europe in a big way around 30,000, 30, 33, 30,000, somewhere in there. So this again, you know, we had a Eurocentric vision of our past because the science of studying this stuff was in France, you know, it was in 19th century in France. Everything was on the focus of where did, you know, white humans come from? The ancestors of Europeans. In other words, that was the game. And along with all other aspects of science, we become more diversified in our kind of view of our origins. So people are paying much more attention. There's a whole, in other words, a neglect of study of everything in Asia. And the Denisovans are just one more example of that. You know, those skulls have not been properly studied in the museums of China, where the one that was most recently discovered. So it's a very exciting time. You know, all this new technology, DNA, all these areas of the globe, they're really yielding a totally different, more complicated story of our origins. It's really great. You know? Yeah.
Could you comment on the, I don't know what the right word is, evolution of intelligence? Is that brain size or is there any science?
No, I mean, you know, yeah, it's a proxy for it. I mean, okay, my orange. Well, chimps are pretty smart, you know, that's one way of looking at it. To say that it's just the size of an orange. Chimpanzees have a lot of sophisticated behavior, like tool making, you know, as I mentioned, tool making and so on. Now, as I said, there's been this traditional view that there's a kind of watershed between Neanderthals and modern humans, that Neanderthals are incapable of abstract symbolic thought. This is the old view. And that it used to be argued for a long time that there was an actual kind of genetic switch in the brain that got flipped. And suddenly you became capable of language and symbolism, all this explosion. And in fact, a best-selling popular book from the 70s was called The Creative Explosion, you know, that led to cave art and all the rest of it. It's much more nuanced now because there's no question that Neanderthals are now, the gap between them has moved more towards our direction, you know. And we really should see them as a kind of very capable reflection of ourselves. After all, they were surviving during the height of the Ice Age for hundreds of thousands of years in these northern latitudes where you know, we wouldn't stand a chance with well, anyway. So this notion of them being very highly skilled and adapted to what they were good at, what they were used to, they deserve total respect. But the intelligence is a tricky one. Yeah.
A question from someone online. When you say everyone outside of Africa has Neanderthal DNA, does that mean that most Homo erectus, or was it only Homo erectus, that came from Africa and passed through that left Africa, passed through Neanderthal territory?
Now, as I told, the reason I focused on 4 examples and not the big picture is because you would have gotten even more confused than you are now. The first exodus from Africa is from Homo erectus around about just after 2 million years ago. So there's this initial colonization of Europe by what's called archaic humans who spread across this landscape as far as the borders of Asia. And oh no, wrong. Homo erectus does go all the way into Asia and then to China. This is initial colonization around 400,000 years ago. Their descendants turn into the Neanderthals. Neanderthals are a more specialized form of this archaic form. They're an even more stronger adaptation to the cold, if you like. So there's that initial wave. Meanwhile, in Africa, the first ancestors of Homo sapiens appear around 300,000 years ago. And they develop slowly over those 300,000 years. And they finally leave Africa around about, we're not sure, around 75,000, 40,000, somewhere in there. And it's a relatively small sample of that population that gets out and starts to spread around. And everywhere they go, they do interbreeding with Neanderthals, not on a huge scale, but it certainly happens. I mean, if it was on a big scale, it would be more than 2 to 4%. Okay. Is that clear?
Where the Denisovans also originally from?
Yeah, the
Homo
Denisovans
erectus?
were evolved. The Denisovans are the equivalents of Neanderthals are in Europe, all the way up to kind of Central Asia, and then their equivalent population is the Denisovans. So Neanderthals and Denisovans are the descendants of that first wave out of Africa 2 million years ago, and then our guys come out at 40,000. And yeah, sorry.
What was happening in the world 3 million years ago outside of Africa? Was there no equivalent species emerging in America?
Well, then you get the bigger, older picture is where do primates come from? And that's a whole science in itself. It's very complex, and a lot of fierce argument about where first primates originated. But the key thing is this emergence, really, of a bipedal ape in Africa. Now, again, there's a tremendous bias because of all this fossils, all these fossil-bearing layers that were discovered neatly laid down in East Africa like a layer cake, like a book that you could read. But that's one place in Africa, and the whole question of what was happening elsewhere, whether other ancestors were going on. There have been a couple of really interesting finds of older species. One very contentious find in Chad, in West Africa, 5 million years ago. It's like half the picture is missing. And we don't know that bipedalism evolved necessarily in this Rift Valley landscape. But it looks like it's a likely place for it. It's a very suitable landscape. As I was trying to show you, we know that there was this grassy environment, and this is what was going on. This is what we have to go on, ultimately. Yeah. Yeah, Tanya?
I have a question about the skull anatomy.
Yeah.
Because I thought that I saw differences between the first two.
Yeah.
And was I seeing things?
Between Lucy and Homo habilis.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, in Homo habilis, the brain is filling out, and the shape is. If the scale isn't right, but the shape difference is roughly right, I think.
Well, I was looking at the different elements and how they came together.
Yeah, the face started to become flatter in Homo habilis. This is correct, but it's not so pronounced a snout as in Lucy.
Well, Homo habilis is a little bit, that's much more mature because you can't see the sutures,
Well, the sutures are, I think, just not realistic. I think they're part of these. Part of the defects of these, they're just painted on to make look. They're not the same thing, same pattern.
They all broken.
Yeah. Okay. I was seeing things then.
Yeah. But what was I going to say? I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. In any case, I know what. This is 3.3 million. This is 2 million. So there is a considerable time gap involved here. And the face has flattened out and the skull has become more rounded and again filled out. So the point is, it looks like a link between Lewis and us. It looks like this could have been an ancestor, but Louis Leakey was confident. This is our guy. This is Homo habilis. This is what I've been looking for. The big-brained, the big-brained guy. He's not a big brain. This was found long after Lewis, had passed on. So,
a couple of related questions online. The first is, did Homo erectus evolve due to an event that caused them to leave the trees? And then someone asked, why did natural selection result in so many of us having lower back problems?
What was the first?
The first question is basically what caused us to leave the trees and stand upright?
Yeah.
And then the next person is asking, why do we all have lower back problems?
Many theories for bipedalism, but the most accepted one that I did refer to was the notion that the landscape was thinning out. So these guys are dependent on tropical fruit, and in a drier regime, those fruit trees get more and more spread out. So if you have to get to those trees and you're in a somewhat exposed landscape, then being able to move up, for a start, you can see more. You might be able to see predators better. A lot of these are kind of just so stories that it's impossible to answer it. But adaptation, the upright walking is clearly very important because it's the adaptation that comes first, not the big brain. It's being upright. There's something about that's crucial. But of course, our skeleton ultimately evolved from knuckle walkers, right? And so there's this is the lower back stuff. There's like a mismatch, evolutionary mismatch between the quadrupedal or ape-like stance and being upright. So evolution is full of things, full of defects. I like the way it's often thought of, evolution. Oh, we're all getting better and smarter and all the rest of it. But along the way, there's all these side effects that are deleterious, and you and I all know, well, not all of you, but I certainly am aware. And,
So all the skulls you showed us have this feature that I'd call like a flying buttress.
It's interesting you call it a flying buttress,
But do modern apes have that, or do other animals have that?
Nothing like as pronounced as it was in these hominid ancestors. But it's funny you mentioned flying buttress, because actually one of the theories for why they emerged, actually currently the most favored one, is that it was an architectural change. As the brain was expanding, and there was a problem with the facial anatomy being linked to that. I'm not explaining it very well, but the idea is that this is part of what holds together a flatter face, the growth of a flatter face and a bigger brain, that you need something to literally an architectural feature that allows those two changes to happen. I don't altogether get it, but that is actually the most favored explanation. Yeah.
I remember hearing a previous talk you gave, talking about some very recent findings, like a couple of years ago, that there was a very constricting event that dramatically diminished the range of entities, people that could go north. How did that pan out?
Yeah, this is the famous bottleneck. So our species of our modern human ancestors come out of Africa, as I said, 75, 40,000 years, somewhere in there, in a relatively short time. And modern humans today have much lower genetic diversity than there should be if it was a large diverse population coming out. Instead, it's quite a narrow selection. And there's different ways of interpreting this. One is that something really bad happened to that founding population to drive the diversity down and drive the numbers down so that there was only a tiny number of humans surviving because of at one time it was thought to be the volcanic catastrophe of Mount Toba in Indonesia erupting in 70,000 that was thought to have produced a climate change that pushed the numbers of humans down to around only about 10,000 or so of breeding pairs, let's put it that way. But there's different ways of construing the data, and it turns out that you can get the same result from having a large number, a much longer time span, not a catastrophic event, but relatively small numbers of widely separated populations. So, this is a statistical thing. So, of course, popular writers ran with the catastrophic image because it's such an amazing idea. Oh, wow, we're so lucky, we were down to 10,000 or even less because of something awful. But I think the evidence is now, it's much clearer that numbers were low but widely scattered populations, and it's unlikely. I just think it's unlikely. Point is, we hung out during a difficult period. So we did survive, but I don't think it was nearly as dramatic as it's often portrayed. But it's a fascinating question. If you look up bottleneck in your AI question thingy, you'll get some interesting answers to.
So why was hapless Homo as opposed to be erect?
Well, this was Louis Leakey's creation.
Right.
He wanted to see it as the first member of the Homo family, and it is still regarded as that because there's enough modern. It starts the trend towards modern features of the flatter face. There's no question about that. It's just that it's not a direct. It's not a missing link. We can't be sure that it's a direct link to us. It may have been one species showing these features, but it looks like it was a possible dead end because of this skeleton announced 3 weeks ago. And the point is there were many of these strands. This is the big story I'm telling you tonight. There are all these different, the rivulets at the end, right? There's all these different streams, and some of them we know about, some of them died out, some of them fed back, a lot of interbreeding at all stages. So it's just this different image. We're so used to thinking of the family tree as one line, one trunk, and it's not like that. We're like other animals. Other animals have this kind of, we know that, look at how many species there are of spiders, dogs, it's not, well, Yes. Quite.
Maybe one more question.
Oh, so you showed us that photo of the piece of a pinky bone.
Yeah.
Brilliant. How does one know that that's a pinky bone?
What are the circumstances of that find? And was there really just that little bit?
Oh no, they found, no. They found the thing is the DNA is preserved differently depending on the conditions it's buried in and in the part of the body too. Interestingly, what DNA hunters really go after is the petrous bone, which is a little bone inside the ear, where for some reason or another, in ancient skeletons, there's the best preservation of DNA is in there. So that's what they're looking for. But this happened to be the thing about Denisova Cave. It's in Siberia, and it's very cold. The cave is very cold, and this led to this extremely high preservation of DNA in most of the bones, but especially in the pinky bones. So it was a function of the site itself. And the members of Svante's team that opened up the result says, famously, he says that he nearly fell off the chair when he saw the implications of it, because it was like, what?
But he saw it with other bones. It wasn't like a pinky bone all by itself.
No, that's the sequence came out of that pinky bone. So that little bone is the smoking gun to a completely unknown, untold chapter of humanity, which is astounding, to think about.
Thank you so much, Evan.
Yes.